What will happen when a man, enjoying a rare day off, is startled by frantic barking and finds a strange, bald creature in his backyard? A trip to the vet reveals a shocking truth that changes his life forever. Chris was a 35-year-old programmer living in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. His cozy home, complete with a small garden, was a haven for him and his loyal dog, Mario. One evening, as Chris was preparing dinner, he was startled by Mario's frantic barking. This was unusual since Mario was normally calm. Curious, Chris wiped his hands and went outside to check on the commotion. To his surprise, Mario was barking fiercely at something hidden beneath a lilac bush. Chris approached and discovered a small, bald creature huddled there. It looked like a large rat, but was completely pink and hairless. The animal was trembling and making faint, sad noises. Chris, feeling a surge of compassion, decided to take the creature inside. He carefully scooped it up and brought it into his warm home. Chris quickly set up a cozy little bed for the strange creature in a cardboard box lined with a soft towel. Not knowing what it should eat, he placed 2 saucers nearby, one with fresh water and the other with warm milk. As the night wore on, Chris stayed awake, deeply concerned for the tiny, trembling animal. He couldn't shake off the feeling that this little creature needed more help than he could provide alone. The next morning, Chris called his friend Dr. Stephen Baker, a veterinarian he trusted. Stephen agreed to see the creature and asked Chris to bring it to his clinic right away. At the vet's office, Stephen was surprised by the oddity of the patient. He carefully measured and weighed the creature, listened to its heartbeat, and ran several tests. Even with his extensive knowledge, Stephen had never seen anything like it before. He guessed it might be an exotic rodent, but was unsure of its exact type. After an X-ray to check its health, Stephen gave Chris a special milk formula and demonstrated how to use a pipette for feeding. Determined to care for the mysterious creature, Chris brought it home to discover where it came from. He named her Violet because of her soft pink skin. Chris quickly set up a cozy cage filled with all the essentials Violet would need. At first, taking care of her was a lot of work. He had to feed Violet every 2 hours, even during the night. Chris was devoted to making sure Violet stayed healthy and happy. He spent hours watching her, fascinated by her little movements. Little did he know that something surprising was about to happen, changing his life in ways he couldn't imagine. But before we delve deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to The Wild Wonder and give that like button a tap. Let's continue the story. As the days passed, Violet grew stronger and more active. She eagerly drank milk and began to explore her cage with curiosity. Chris noticed her pink skin, slowly covered with soft, sparse fur. He frequently updated Dr. Baker with photos and videos, seeking advice on how to care for this unique pet. After a week, Chris felt Violet was ready for a bit of freedom outside the cage. He set up a safe play area in the living room where Violet could wander and play. The little cub happily explored her new space, discovering new things with each step. One day, Chris was thrilled to find Violet cozily nestled on Mario's back. The dog lay still, allowing Violet to snuggle into his fur. It was such a heartwarming sight that Chris took photos to capture the moment. However, as Violet continued to grow, Chris noticed something unusual. Her large front paws were equipped with sharp claws. This made him wonder about her true nature. Feeling a bit anxious, Chris reached out to Stephen for updates on the reports. Stephen assured Chris that he would provide more information soon. Meanwhile, Violet's fur grew thicker, and her eyes widened with curiosity. Stephen was still puzzled by Violet, and continued to consult with colleagues and delve into various books, but he couldn't determine what Violet was. Meanwhile, Violet's nighttime escapades became more frequent and chaotic. Chris often woke up to find his pet had escaped from her cage and wreaked havoc in the living room. Violet had become a pro at climbing furniture and opening drawers. Despite Chris's attempts to fortify the cage and secure it tightly, Violet always managed to slip out. Eventually, Chris resigned himself to the fact that his extraordinary pet was a nocturnal explorer. 2 weeks after discovering Violet, Chris was jolted awake by a loud, alarming noise from the first floor. It sounded like a wild ruckus. Grabbing a baseball bat for protection, Chris cautiously made his way downstairs. What he saw in the living room was unbelievable. The room was a complete disaster. Furniture overturned, books scattered everywhere, and curtains torn apart. But the most astonishing sight was yet to come. Beside Violet were 2 more bald cubs and a large, furry creature that resembled an enormous guinea pig. Chris was stunned, standing frozen in shock. The large creature noticed him and let out a deep growl. Terrified of provoking it, Chris slowly backed away and quietly shut the door behind him. With trembling hands, he called Stephen, urgently explaining the chaos and asking for help. Even though it was late at night, Stephen agreed to come over right away. Chris peered through a crack in the door and saw the large creature, clearly a female, gently caring for the cubs. After what felt like an eternity, Stephen arrived with a tranquilizer and a sturdy net, prepared for anything. Together, Chris and Stephen cautiously entered the room. Dr. Baker's initial shock quickly turned to laughter. He slapped his forehead and exclaimed, "I can't believe I didn't realize it sooner. These are wombats." Confused, Chris asked what he meant. Stephen explained that they were looking at an Australian wombat mother and her 3 cubs. Somehow, these wombats had traveled all the way to Seattle, far from their natural home. Stephen reassured Chris that the wombat family was probably part of an illegal smuggling ring. The veterinarian spoke calmly to the wombat mother, who, surprisingly, didn't show any aggression. Stephen examined the animals and confirmed they were healthy but a bit underweight. He suspected that the wombats had escaped from smugglers and found their way to Chris's basement. Chris remembered the strange noises he had heard from the basement, which he had ignored. It was when one of the cubs ventured outside that Mario had alerted Chris, leading to the discovery of the wombat family. Stephen quickly called a wildlife protection center for help. While they waited for the staff to arrive, Chris and Stephen talked about how the wombats might have ended up in Seattle. The center staff soon arrived with special cages and carefully took the wombats away. Chris watched with mixed feelings, worried about their future, but hopeful they would be well cared for. Soon after, a police investigation revealed a major smuggling ring, and the smugglers were caught. Chris was stunned by how extensive the illegal operation was. Inspired by his experience, he decided to volunteer at the Wildlife Center, helping to care for wombats and other animals. Over the next 3 months, Violet and her family flourished under the center's care. They regained their strength quickly and were soon ready to return to their natural habitat. On the day of their departure, Chris said a heartfelt goodbye. This experience had deeply affected him, making him more aware of wildlife and conservation issues. A month later, Chris received photos of the wombats in an Australian reserve. Seeing Violet again, happy and healthy, brought a smile to Chris's face. He was grateful for the unexpected adventure that had uncovered a major crime and changed his perspective on wildlife and conservation forever. That's all for today. Now, it's your turn to share your thoughts about this story. What's the next story you'd like to know? Let us know in the comment section below, and be sure to subscribe so you won't miss any of these amazing videos on The Wild Wonder.